Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Rural Rebel News Report number 12 now. As always, I'm your host, the Rural Rebel. If you haven't already, then please be sure to hit that share button. That is the only way that our broadcast can get out to as many people as possible. Also, if you value what we do here at the Rural Rebel, we've recently set up a Patreon where for only $3 a month, you can get an exclusive report every week and support us so that if Facebook does come for us, we can weather that storm. And the only people we want to do this for and the only sponsors we want are you, the people. A huge thank you to everyone that has decided to support us so far on Patreon. This broadcast is for each and every single one of you. The link for our Patreon will be posted in the video description as always. But tonight we're going to be bringing you stories on R.Kelly being sentenced for crimes against children. G7 leaders unveil a $600 billion infrastructure plan to tackle Chinese influence. Disgraced former New South Wales Deputy Premier John Pork Barilaro, worms his way into a $500,000 US ambassador role. Vladimir Putin warning Finland and Sweden not to install NATO infrastructure. Thousands of New South Wales teachers strike in historic joint strike over pay and conditions. And I will also have an update on Aussie COSSACK for you. But on to our first story for tonight, and it is on more corruption coming out of John Barilaro. If you can believe it or not, it's not too far of a stretch. But here we are, again, more corruption out of the political spectrum with John Barilaro trying to secure a $500,000 US ambassadorship. Here are the key points we know about the history of this and how he's been able to secure this role. Mr. Barilaro requested changes to the recruitment process in late September last year, which required it to get a government approval. Days later, he retired from politics. Investment New South Wales boss Amy Brown, who oversees the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner roles, said a candidate was selected before Mr. Barilaro's request. A verbal offer to the chosen candidate was withdrawn after Mr. Barilaro's requested changes. The relationship between the candidate and Investment New South Wales then became irreconcilable. The Senior Trade and Investment Commission post in New York comes with a $487,000 salary plus a $16,000 cost of living allowance. Nearly $1 million has been spent refurbishing part of the Australian consulate in New York where Mr. Barilaro is to occupy. Mr. Barilaro was verbally offered the job in May of this year, signed a 3-year contract in June, and is due to begin the role in July. He will be owed a week's salary if he is removed within his 6-month probationary period. After that, he could be owed the wages due for the full 3-year contract. So he set this up pretty magnificently, hasn't he? Miss Brown used to work under Mr. Barilaro when he was a trade minister. Mr. Barilaro's office and Miss Brown met to discuss other ways a commissioner candidate can be appointed besides the independent hiring by Investment New South Wales. Miss Brown expressed concerns last year in internal communications that Mr. Barilaro's office would try to veto her picks for the role. She said a staffer on temporary secondment had misunderstood what she sent when she sent an email, since resurfaced requesting the Premier's approval for 2 other commissioner appointments, despite the recruitment being an apolitical process. But this is just more and more corruption from this horrible excuse for a public servant. He certainly more than earns his nickname, John Pork Barilaro, because he's nothing but a pig, sloshing around in our taxpayer dollars without a care in the world. How these people even get elected is completely beyond me. But then to change the rules for a job right before he leaves politics, it really, really sums up the whole system in a nutshell, doesn't it? No matter which side of the fence you're on, the stench is absolutely horrendous. But now on to some historic news coming out of the New South Wales and ACT with a historic teachers' strike in New South Wales. That's right, thousands of public and Catholic schools have rallied in New South Wales and the ACT demanding better wages and working conditions. The decision to take 24-hour joint strike action on 30th of June was made after a meeting between the executives of the New South Wales Teachers Federation and the Independent Education Union of Australia, with members of both unions rallying in Macquarie Street, Sydney, as well as in regional locations across New South Wales and the ACT. Dressed in red shirts emblazoned with the text, "More than thanks," teachers at the protest in Sydney CBD called on the government to offer them more than a 3% pay rise. The New South Wales Teachers Federation is asking for a pay rise between 5 and 7%. Many protesters held up satirical placards poking fun at inflation, such as "Thanks won't buy lettuce," and to make the point that living costs have soared. It is the third strike in 6 months called by the New South Wales Teachers Federation and Independent Education Union New South Wales ACT, representing 85,000 teachers. The strike is expected to have affected about 1 million families statewide, just a day before a 2-week school break. Peter Katonga, 50, a legal studies teacher at Sir Joseph Banks High School in Revesby in Western Sydney, said he was fed up with deteriorating working conditions. "I have been working as a public school teacher for 13 years and our salaries have not kept up with inflation," he told. "It's the duty of the government to ensure that students have a qualified teacher in front of them. You can bring teachers on board by giving them better pay." Well, that's pretty simple by the sounds, isn't it? But this was the first time in more than 25 years that both unions have joined forces to strike for 24 hours. "We have a crisis in the form of a teacher shortage, a crisis that is the government's own doing," New South Wales Teachers Federation President Angelo Gavrilatos said. But this is a system, in my opinion, we've had for too long. Money that doesn't encourage more people to want to do the job. But especially with the mandates that the different governments have implemented, along with the pressures of teaching, it's really no surprise we're in this condition or position. But what are the causes of these conditions? Is it overworking due to the mandates? Or are people leaving the industry? Or is it both? Either way, it certainly doesn't bode well for the youngest in our society having a shambles of an education system, that's for sure. So either way, it definitely needs to sort itself out. Now we've got some news coming out of Russia with Vladimir Putin sending a stern warning to Finland, the Netherlands and Sweden to not install NATO infrastructure. That's right. NATO are trying to spread their influence even further, with Vladimir Putin sending a warning for countries not to allow NATO infrastructure. Hours after the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, formally invited Sweden and Finland to join the military alliance, the Russian president reacted strongly and warned of possible repercussions. Addressing a news conference in Turkmenistan on Wednesday, Vladimir Putin maintained he has no issues if Nordic countries join the US-backed military alliance, but warned Moscow will respond in kind if both the nations welcome NATO troops and military infrastructure onto their territory. Earlier, Putin had said that if Sweden and Finland want to join the NATO alliance, Moscow does not have any issues with that. In fact, if they want to join NATO, go ahead. In a statement on Wednesday, he said, only we must clearly and precisely understand, while there was no threat before, in the case of military contingents and military infrastructure being deployed there, we will have to respond symmetrically and raise the same threats in those territories from where threats have arisen for us, CNN reported. Notably on Wednesday during the NATO summit in Madrid, the NATO heads of state and government said in a declaration that it decided to invite Finland and Sweden to become members of NATO and agreed to sign the accession protocols. The accession of Finland and Sweden will make them safer, NATO stronger, and the Euro-Atlantic area more secure. The security of Finland and Sweden is of direct importance to the alliance, including during the accession process, the declaration read. But in quite shocking news, it's pertinent to mention that a major turn came when Turkey, which had always shown reluctance in accepting the NATO memberships of the Nordic regions, has lifted its veto over Finland and Sweden's bid to join the bloc. Speaking during a meeting with US President Joe Biden on the margins of the NATO summit, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said, "We are trying to solve the process with a balancing policy. Our hope is that this balanced policy will lead to results and allow us the possibility to get grain to countries that are facing shortages right now through a corridor as soon as possible." But this is an important point. This is something important to point out. But this is Turkey are leading the way in totalitarian New World Order legislation. They are. They're putting all of these horrific dystopian laws into place. So, and now they're suddenly advocating for the expansion of NATO. Perhaps these are the final things being put in place for the Great Reset. But I'm sure only time will tell. That's for sure. But we have more international news coming out of the G7 summit. That's right, more agenda from the boys at G7. You can see them there, all lined up like good little soldiers, aren't they? But the G7 leaders have unveiled a $600 billion infrastructure plan to tackle Chinese influence, with $200 billion being pledged from Joe Biden. The plan has been called the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. It will provide $600 billion in infrastructure investments by 2027, with the US contributing $200 billion over the next 5 years. But the capital, it's been said, will come from like-minded partners, multilateral development banks, development financial institutions, sovereign wealth funds, and more, according to Biden. But we know who the like-minded partners and development financial institutions are, don't we? But it goes on to say that these investments will help middle-income countries grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic and human-made climate change. The Biden administration noted that infrastructure has long been underfunded, and there is more than over $40 trillion in estimated need in the developing world. Biden said that this investment in infrastructure will help shape global stability. It will ensure health and health security, digital connectivity, gender equality and equity, and climate and energy security, which is literally the opposite of what they're after right now, isn't it? He also clarified that the investment will deliver returns for everyone, including the American people and people of all nations, and was not aid or charity. But I think he means deliver returns for the ones who invest, making money off the suffering that they've created. Where else have we seen this? But while his country's inflation spirals out of control, Joe Biden announces a $200 billion contribution while his population is suffering. NATO seem worried about anything that isn't based in the Western world, with them now pointing the finger at China as well. But Blackrock, Vanguard and State Street are no threat, obviously. Not worth mentioning anything other than the scapegoats for the atrocities of their Western world. Well, I have, to finish off this report, I have a video of Joe Biden making this announcement with his stooges standing behind him. Here we go.
That's why the United States, together with the G7 partners and the World Bank, are investing in a new industrial-scale vaccine manufacturing facility in Senegal. When complete, we'll have the potential to produce hundreds of millions of doses of vaccine annually for COVID-19 and other diseases. We need to strengthen the use of trusted technologies so that our online information cannot be used by autocrats to consolidate their power or repress their people. That's why the Digital Invest program is mobilizing $335 million in private capital to supply secure network equipment in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And the U.S. government...
There you go. But I've got my final thought is, how about we get our own economies out of the toilet before we go printing money for everyone else? But we will move on to some news and an update on Aussie COSSACK, which is quite alarming. That's right, he has been sentenced. He appeared. It is an unfortunate update on Aussie COSSACK, but I did promise they'd come in as they occurred. But after attending court today for a sentencing hearing, he has been sentenced to 6 months in jail for breaching suppression orders, with the court system holding seemingly consistent with the penalties they applied to, say Darren Hinch. But how is this system being created this way so that it's protecting these people that commit these atrocious acts and not those who want the public to know they exist amongst them? It is certainly backwards. It's unfortunately the world we're living in. But one final message is to say, stay strong in there, Simeon. I'm sure there'll be a lot of love for you when you get out on the other side, I'm sure. And I'll be providing all updates as you know they occur. But yes, certainly worrying. Aussie COSSACK has been convicted and sentenced for breaching suppression orders. There's not much more to the story in that, except our thoughts and prayers are with Simeon, holding strong in there. But on to our final story tonight, which is about more high-profile people being sentenced for crimes against children. That's right, the day after Ghislaine Maxwell gets sentenced, R.Kelly follows it up. That's right, if you don't know who R.Kelly is, he was a very, very popular R&B artist in the 2000s. And for a very long time, he has been accused of these crimes. But a federal judge has finally sentenced singer and convicted sexual predator R.Kelly to 30 years in prison. Kelly was convicted last September of racketeering and violating the Mann Act, a sex trafficking law, including having sex with underage girls. He could have faced up to life in prison. Well, even that would have been too good for him. Kelly declined to make a statement during the hearing on Wednesday. Outside the courthouse, Jennifer Bongine, a lawyer for Kelly, said his lawyers advised him not to make a statement because he still has a pending case. She said he'll make a statement eventually. I'll have her statement in video form at the end here. But US Attorney Breon Peace, who prosecuted the case, called Kelly a predator and said the outcome is significant. Peace said justice was finally achieved, speaking outside the courthouse. Attorney Gloria Allred, who represented victims in the case, called Kelly a skilled sexual predator. They are relieved that he has been sent to prison for approximately 30 years, because while he is in prison, he will not be able to sexually victimize anyone, Allred said. He continued committing his crimes for almost 30 years until today. But when will the other people known be held to account? His defense team asked for less than 14 years in prison, citing Kelly's traumatic childhood. But during his trial, nearly 4 dozen witnesses testified for the prosecution, alleging that he preyed upon children and women for his sexual gratification. He was also convicted in a bribery scheme involving a public official to get a fake ID for the late singer Alia, so the two could marry when she was 15 and he was 27. Kelly believed Alia was pregnant at the time, prosecutors wrote in a sentencing memo. And his lawyers had the gall to ask for a reduced sentence? Incredible. But Kelly relied upon his fame, money, and popularity as an R&B recording star and used the large network of people his status afforded him, including his business managers, security guards, and bouncers, runners, lawyers, accountants, and assistants to both carry out and conceal his crimes, prosecutors said. He continued his crimes and avoided punishment for them for almost 30 years and must now be held to account. But like I said, to finish this story, I have a video of his lawyer announcing an appeal to this sentence. So it could certainly get worse for him.
Obviously, you know, it was a hard day. He's been sentenced to a serious sentence. But we are confident in our arguments that we raised in our post-trial motions, that although they didn't persuade the district court judge, that they will persuade the Court of Appeals. We've always believed in those arguments, and we believe that this enterprise was overcharged, and that the Second Circuit Court of Appeals will see it that way.
Well, that'll do it for tonight's edition of Rural Rebel News. Thank you so much for spending some of your valuable time with us tonight. And if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that share button. It means more than you know. On behalf of myself, Ryan Jackson Saw, and the whole Rural Rebel team, good night. And as always, we're bringing you the rural side of the story. Good night.